In the heart of an ancient land where the sun rarely pierced the thick canopy of trees and the mornings were swallowed by an eerie white mist, there lay a place the world had forgotten, Mandek. Legends told of spirits that danced in the mist, of whispers that could drive a sane man mad. But there was one story feared and revered above all, the tale of the Fog Gang, an elusive band of warriors and outcasts who moved through the fog like ghosts. No one saw them coming. No one saw them leave. They struck with purpose, vanishing into the mist before a scream could rise. At the center of this feared force stood a girl, Ayira. She was not born a warrior. She came from the village of Temba, a humble cluster of mud and thatch huts nestled near the marshlands where women were expected to gather water, not lead armies. But Ayira was never meant to be ordinary. Even as a child, her eyes shimmered with rebellion, and her silence was louder than most men's roars. She spoke less, watched more, and moved like a shadow through the reeds and fog that surrounded her village. When she was only 10, bandits raided Temba. The men stood frozen, the warriors fled. But Ayira picked up a blade, heavy, rusted, almost taller than her, and with fire in her lungs she struck down one of the raiders. That moment echoed through the region. She became more than a child. She became a warning. Whispers of the girl who tamed the storm reached Mandek, and the Fog Gang's myth to most came for her. They did not test her. They did not question her. They followed her. Ayira became their leader not through blood or name, but through fire, vision, and silence. Under her command, the gang changed. No longer were they mindless raiders. She taught them to take from the corrupt, to give to the forgotten. They would sneak into the walled cities of kings, steal gold from their treasuries, and leave food for the starving villagers. To the nobles, she was a criminal. To the poor, a legend. To the Fog Gang, a goddess cloaked in mist. But power, like fog, can cloud even the clearest minds. In the stillness of Mandek's marshes, Ayira began to dream. Dreams not of justice, but of vengeance. Not for the world, but for herself. For the way her village treated her like a burden. For the years she was ignored, mocked, diminished. One night, as the fog curled tightly around the gang's hidden camp, Ayira stood before her warriors and said, "We will burn the place that birthed my pain. We will bring down Temba." No one questioned her. Not one voice rose in protest. The Fog Gang, loyal beyond reason, began to prepare. Not for justice, not for balance, but for destruction. And the fog, ever silent, began to thicken. The forest held its breath. Ayira stood on a ridge, overlooking the valley below, where the village of Temba lay nestled between the rivers of ash and the swamp of whispers. It looked so small from here, fragile even, like something that could be crushed beneath her foot. But it wasn't the size of the village that haunted her. It was the weight of memories that clung to every mud wall, every worn path, every silent face that had once turned away from her. Her warriors stood behind her, silent shadows cloaked in ash-gray robes. The Fog Gang. Over 200 men and women who had sworn loyalty not to a kingdom, not to gold, but to her. Most of them had no homes, no names, no pasts. Mandek had taken them in when the world cast them out, and Ayira had given them purpose. Now, she was asking them to follow her into something darker, something personal. There was no speech, no rallying cry. Ayira simply raised her hand, a signal, and the gang moved. Like fog, they descended the slope without sound. Even the leaves seemed afraid to rustle. They were ghosts in a land that didn't believe in them. Yet, a young recruit named Salo walked beside Ayira. He had joined only a few months ago, a quiet boy with too many questions and eyes that reminded Ayira of herself. He looked at her now, hesitating before he spoke. "Commander," he said quietly, "the people in Temba, are they our enemies?" Ayira didn't look at him. She kept walking, Her voice, when it came, was low. They made me an enemy. They created what I've become. Salo paused. But have they done anything to us lately? Ayira stopped. The entire march seemed to still. Her eyes met his. There was no anger in them, only weight. You're young, she said. You think cruelty must be fresh to justify fire. But some wounds don't bleed, they rot. And when they rot long enough, they poison everything. Salo lowered his gaze. He didn't speak again. As the gang neared the outskirts of Temba, Ayira ordered silence. Scouts moved ahead, checking paths and counting guards. But Temba was not a place prepared for war. Its people had long abandoned the idea that they were worth attacking. It had no walls, no real warriors, just elders, farmers, and children. Ayira stood among the reeds on the village's edge as night fell. She could see the glow of cooking fires, hear the distant laughter of children chasing each other. It didn't look like a place that had once broken her. It looked peaceful, innocent. Her hand hesitated. For a moment, just a moment, she imagined turning around, calling off the attack, letting the fog retreat back into Mandek. But the moment passed. She raised her hand again. The fog gang moved like breath in the night. They surrounded the village, and when the moon reached its peak, Ayira gave the final command. Burn it. Flames rose like red tongues into the sky. Screams followed. Chaos exploded. Ayira didn't move. She stood still, watching the place she once called home turn to smoke and ash. It was done. But even as the fire danced in her eyes, something inside her began to go cold. Morning came slowly, crawling over the horizon like a guilty thing. The sky, once proud and endless, now hung low and gray, thick with smoke and regret. Temba was no longer a village, it was a ruin. Blackened skeletons of huts still smoldered. Ash floated like snow through the air. And the silence. It was deeper than any fog. Ayira stood alone in the center of the devastation, her boots half sunk in the wet soot beneath her. Her cloak smelled of smoke, her hair stiff with ash. But none of that mattered. Her heart, which had once burned, like the fires she commanded, now felt hollow. She had thought it would feel like justice. She had thought the roar of fire would drown out the voices of the past, the mocking elders, the cruel boys, the women who turned their faces when she cried. But the only thing she heard now was silence. The fog gang had retreated to the trees, waiting for orders. They had done as she asked, perfectly, without question, because that's what Ayira demanded, obedience, loyalty. And they had given her exactly what she wanted. So why did it feel like something had been taken from her? Ayira wandered alone. Each step was an echo of the past. There was the stone well, where she once fetched water, broken now. There, the wooden bench where she sat while others whispered, charred. There, the old tamarind tree where she once carved her name, still standing, half burnt, scorched, but still standing. Her name was still there, faint, Ayira. She reached out and touched it with soot-stained fingers. Behind her, footsteps, Salo. He approached slowly, his face pale. He had fought in the raid, as all fog gang members had, but he carried no pride in his stance, no triumph. Only a quiet sort of horror. I found survivors, he said softly. Mostly children and an old woman. She says she knew you. Ayira turned slowly. Where? He led her to the edge of the destruction, to the remains of a storage hut that had somehow escaped the worst of the flames. Inside, huddled behind a shattered basket, was a woman with white hair and eyes that had once been sharp. She coughed, smoke, but when she looked up at Ayira, her breath caught. Little Flame, she whispered. Ayira froze. That name, no one had called her that in years. The woman was Maga, the village healer, one of the few who had ever shown her kindness. "You did this?" Maga rasped. Ayira opened her mouth, but no sound came. Maga coughed again, wiping soot from her lips. "You were meant to be more than this. I told them they were wrong about you, but you've proven them right." Ayira's fists clenched. "No, I was right. They made me this. I gave them a choice, none to love me or fear me. They chose fear." "They didn't choose anything," Maga said, her voice sharp despite the smoke in her lungs. "They just didn't understand you. And now, there's nothing left to understand." Ayira turned away. She walked outside. The fog was starting to creep back in, soft tendrils curling around her legs like the ghosts of the past. She stood still. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Was I wrong?" From the tree line, the fog gang waited. They would follow her, again. Wherever she led. But Ayira didn't know where she was going anymore. For the first time in years, Ayira didn't give a command. The fog gang waited beneath the trees, still as shadows, watching their leader as the sun bled behind the hills. The silence between them stretched long and tense like a bowstring pulled tight. They had never seen her hesitate. She had been their North Star, their flame in the fog. But now that flame flickered. She had not eaten, had not spoken, had not looked them in the eye. Some among them began to whisper. Quiet doubt spread like smoke through a house on fire. "She's changed," murmured Doro, the gang's second in command, a fierce woman with braided hair and arms carved with scars of loyalty. She didn't even watch the burning. "She used to lead from the front," said another. "Now she hides among ashes." "But she gave the order," a younger voice protested. "We followed. She never turned back." "True," Doro said coldly. "But a commander who doesn't believe in the blade she wields becomes the blade that cuts us all." That night, Ayira walked back through the ruins of Temba, past charred rooftops and scorched tools, and found the children. There were a dozen of them, soot-streaked, wide-eyed, clinging to each other in a half-collapsed granary. Salo was with them, kneeling, giving out scraps of smoked meat from his satchel. He looked up as Ayira entered, eyes unsure. "Why are they still here?" she asked quietly. "No home left," he said. "Nowhere else to go. They're too small to cross the swamps, too afraid of the fog." She knelt beside a child, a little girl, maybe 6, held a cloth doll burned down to the threads. The girl didn't cry, just stared at Ayira with hollow, unwavering eyes. "What's your name?" Ayira asked. "Nima," the child whispered. Ayira reached out, but Nima flinched, a dagger to the heart. Ayira stood abruptly. She turned to Salo. "I want you to take them away, lead them north. There's a hilltop settlement beyond the dry riverbed. I passed it years ago. They will take them in." Salo blinked. "Alone?" "I'll send no soldiers with you," Ayira said. "Only supplies. You'll go at first light." "But what about you?" Ayira didn't answer. She stepped outside. The mist was thick, now swallowing the trees, the ruins, the doubts, and in that silence she felt the weight of every life she had unmade. She had burned Temba to erase her pain, but the fire had only lit it brighter. As the fog deepened, Doro approached. "You're sending the boy away," she said. "And the children." "Yes." "And what of us?" Doro asked. "We stand idle while you unravel." Ayira didn't flinch. "You are free to go. I won't command ghosts." Doro's mouth tightened. "We followed you because you were certain. You were fire and vengeance. What are you now?" Ayira looked out into the fog, her voice low. "A woman who mistook her scars for a map." A long silence. "You lost yourself," Doro said. "No," Ayira whispered. "I think I've finally found her." Doro stared at her for a long moment, then wordlessly turned and melted back into the mist. Ayira stood alone again. But this time it didn't feel like weakness. It felt like beginning. The dawn came with no birdsong, just the hush of mist slipping between trees and the distant sound of children's footsteps fading into the hills. Salo had taken them north just as Ayira ordered. She watched them disappear one by one into the low golden light, a trail of life walking out of the ruin she had made. And now she was alone. But it was not loneliness that filled her. It was clarity, the kind that only comes after you've burned everything behind you. The fog gang was breaking. Not with betrayal, not with rebellion, but with silence. Many of them had already slipped away during the night. Dora was gone. Others, too. Only a few lingered near the edge of the ruins, waiting perhaps for Ayira to rise again, to return to vengeance. To lead them somewhere, anywhere, through the fog. But Ayira was not theirs anymore. She stood before the remnants of the tamarind tree where her name had once been carved. Only the lower half of the tree remained now, twisted by flame, her name barely visible. She took out her blade, the one she had carried since she was a child, and slid it into the soil. A final act. Not surrender, not punishment, but closure. 3 days passed. Ayira walked, alone, away from Mandek carrying. Only a cloth satchel and a hollow ache in her chest. She did not know where she was going. There was no map, no destination. Only instinct. Only forward. She passed through old paths she had once ambushed merchants on, past the cliffs where she first trained the fog gang to leap like ghosts, past the ravine where she first killed to survive. Each place gave her pieces of herself, but none of them defined her anymore. The sky opened wide. A hill rose beyond the cracked riverbed, dotted with green shoots and signs of life. Smoke curled gently from the clay chimneys of a small settlement, the one Ayira had spoken of. Children played beneath trees. No one knew her name here. No one looked at her like a ghost or a god. She sat by the edge of the hill, watching the village breathe. And then she saw them. Salo, the children. They were safe, eating, laughing, alive. Ayira didn't approach. She simply smiled, a real smile, the first in years, and turned away. That night, Ayira camped at the edge of the wildlands. The wind carried no smoke. The stars were sharp and quiet. And the fog? It never came. For the first time since childhood, she slept without a blade in hand. No one knows what became of the fog gang. Some say they scattered into new lands, others that they dissolved back into mist. Ayira was never seen in any capital, never captured, never glorified. But stories whispered of a traveler, a woman with scarred hands and steady eyes, who wandered from village to village, helping rebuild what others had broken. They called her many names. But in one forgotten village beneath a half-burnt tamarind tree, the wind still carries her real name, Ayira, the girl who once ruled the fog and walked out of it.